I don't want to warm up with anything too easy. So we're going to talk about some of the African giants first. And I think there's possibly not an African team with more negative things to say, unfortunately, than the Ghana Black Stars. Let me just set the stage a little bit. So obviously one of the biggest, most historic teams in the African continent. They are currently in third place of their qualification group for the 2025 AFCON, a group that includes Angola, Sudan, and Niger. They're sitting on 2 points, 5 points behind Sudan. They're on the brink of elimination. Please give me some enlightenment to what is going on with Ghana. Why has this team fallen so far from grace recently?
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, Ghana is eliminated. There's a 99.9% chance that we won't be seeing them at the 2025 African Cup of Nations, which takes place in about 12 to 13 months' time, December 2025. So we're going to have a Christmas AFCON. As you mentioned, Ghana is, they don't really need an introduction, but I feel like I still have to say four-time AFCON champions. The runs that they've been on, especially in the World Cup since, their inaugural participation in 2006, have been really good and culminating that 2010 participation that everybody remembers, where they almost became the first African team to make it to a semifinal, were it not for that Luis Suarez handball. World-class players that they've produced, players like Michael Essien, Soli Ali Muntari, Mohamed Kudus these days. There is no reason why Ghana should be in the predicament that they're in. And they had gone through a golden generation from 2006 to 2015. They had finished in the top four of every single African Cup of Nations, until 2017. And no other team goes on a run like this. They either finished second, third, or fourth. They hadn't won an AFCON, but they were still showing consistent high quality performances. And this is the generation of, again, Essien, Muntari, Daniel Amarte, Emmanuel Ajimeng Badu in midfield, Asamoah Gyan, of course, Andre Ayew, Jordan Ayew, Kojo Asamoah, a lot of very talented players. In 2017, something happens. I think we see the older generation sort of age, and there is no real smooth transition. And what we've seen, the first AFCON was 2019. The last three, they've only won one match. 2019, they make it to the round of 16, but they're eliminated by Tunisia. 2021, they're eliminated by Comoros. And Comoros is participating in their first ever AFCON. That was a scandal of all scandals, but that wasn't even as bad as the last AFCON, because the last AFCON, they're in the final match of the group stages. They haven't won a match yet. They've been pretty poor, but they have Chris Hughton as a coach, former Brighton, former Newcastle, a lot of Premier League experience. They have Mohamed Kudus, who was great at the World Cup, a few months prior. And they're winning 2-0 against Mozambique. They're in the 90th minute, and somehow, some way, they concede two goals. And then in extra time, and all hell breaks loose. The journalists practically attack the players because the players don't want to come out to the mix zone to speak to them. They're demanding accountability. Just been utmost shame all around. And so I say all of this as I'm sort of preparing to explain, like, what happened? How did we get from that golden generation to what's going on now? I think many Ghanaians would struggle to explain it. Some people say, it's a degradation of the Ghanaian Premier League in big clubs like Asante Kotoko or Hearts of Oak in Accra. Some people say it's, poor coaching. Most recently, Ghana lost to Sudan. Sudan is coached by a Ghanaian coach, Kwesi Appiah. So why did the Ghanaian FA not find him, for example, or another Ghanaian coach instead of Otto Addo, who hasn't been bad in the past, but hasn't really lived up to expectations this time around? They've made previous very poor coaching decisions like Chris Hughton or Mila Van Rijvac. So many people point at, the degradation of the league, sometimes corruption in the FA. They've had corruption scandals over the last decade or so, poorly run administration, and all of these things have sort of combined, and it's just very bad momentum dragging the team down, and they're struggling to sort of break through and string together a couple of positive results.
So it seems like there's obviously multiple things plaguing this team. If you had to identify one major thing, like, is it as simple as saying this is another case of just, FA corruption in Africa? Or do you think it's like the players? Are they just down tooling? Is it Ado as a manager? Is he just over his head? Like, if I'm sitting down or you're sitting down with the Ghanaian FA president, you have a to-do list. These are the top 5 things we need to fix in order to fix Ghana. What would be your number one?
Me personally, I think that the buck always stops with the coach, because I've seen it time and time again where a country is really down in the doldrums and the right coach comes in the right situation, and with the exact same players, he'll turn it around. I can talk about my own country, Algeria. Algeria didn't qualify to the 2018 FIFA World Cup, and we were in a very bad run. And the right coach comes Long Jamal Belmadi, and he turns it around and we go 35 matches unbeaten and win the 2019 AFCON. And it's the exact same set of players. So I think if I were consulting the Ghanaian FA, I would say, look, we need a coach that's done it before. We need a coach that's won an AFCON. We need a coach that exudes serenity, exudes stability, has tactical acumen. And there are some coaches available. Jamal Belmadi is a name that I just mentioned right now, or Aliou Cisse, the former coach of Senegal that had been coaching them for a decade. He won an AFCON in 2021, and he also took them to 2 FIFA World Cups, made another final of an AFCON, and he wouldn't be very, very expensive. So I think there are candidates out there. Because what I see is tactical issues, like a lot of Ghanaian forwards or strikers, for example, not making runs into space. Very few actually stretch the defense. Another thing that I've seen, actually, and this comes down to maybe using too many Ghanaian coaches, is that the influence of certain players, like a Jordan Ayew or an Andre Ayew, in this team had been going on for too long. And because, their father is a Betty Pele, Ghana's best football player of all time. They grew up as, like the privileged kids, and they've made, I think, 100 caps each now. And so they have a certain amount of influence, not just within other players, but also within the federation and stuff. And it's not as easy to cut those players out if you're Ghanaian, because you understand, who these people are. But if you're a foreign coach, you come in and you say, look, I need to turn a new page. Thank you for your service, but we need to move on. So I think probably switching a new coach that's going to come in, invest in, the talent is there. They have an academy called Right to Dream Academy that's produced Mohamed Kudus, produced Kamaldeen Sulemana, Ibrahim Osman, who's currently on loan in Belgium, but he's on the books of Brighton, very talented. Ernest Nuema is another one at Lyon. He's also from the Right to Dream Academy. So they have the young talent there. And I do think that they have the talent to perform better than they have. But I think they need the right coach to come along, divorce everything that's gone on in the last 5 years or 6 years, and turn the page and play hungry, attacking football. The whole country needs to have more humility and realize, look, we're in a really crappy situation. We need to start stringing together even 1-0 victories. Draws are okay. We need to just start stringing together positive results.
You have to forgive this question because I'm not super familiar with the domestic game in Africa, but you said that there's been a bit of a lowering of the overall skill level of the Ghanaian Premier League. In terms of the rest of the domestic leagues in Africa, I'm not sure where Ghana ranks there, but I have to assume that it's still one of the better leagues in the continent. Would you say that's fair to say?
I think it's fair to assume that because of the kind of quality player that Ghana produces. But the problem with leagues like Ghana, Nigeria, even Cote d'Ivoire, don't get me wrong, there are some decent clubs in these countries. There's Enyimba in Nigeria. Last year, Ghana had a club called Samartex that was quite good. Cote d'Ivoire has Isaac Mimosas. There are 1 or 2 clubs that are competitive in the Champions League. But the main problem with these clubs is they produce a lot of talent, but there's an ecosystem, a predatory ecosystem, where there are thousands, tens of thousands of agents just waiting for the next talent. And as soon as they hit 17, 18 years old, they're whisked away to Europe. And as a result, the top clubs in these countries, they can't pay good salaries. And because of that, and because, of these pipelines going to Europe, they're not able to compete with a lot of North African clubs that have that kind of money, or South African clubs, which also have a lot more cash. So to be honest, in Africa at the moment, North Africa has been dominating for the last decade. You have 3 or 4 South African clubs that are competitive as well, 1 or 2 in Tanzania. But West Africa, by and large, any kind of quality player that emerges from there is usually whisked away as soon as they turn 18 years old.
So do you think even though those players are going to Europe, which is always kind of forecasted as, oh, this is how you make it, like you need to go from Argentina or Japan or Iran or Ivory Coast over to Europe, that's like the pathway for success, even though they're making it or at least landing in these European leagues, you're saying that overall it still might be hurting the national team to some degree?
I'll say that this is a narrative that exists in Ghana. This is something I just heard, a few weeks ago, because some people believe that, look, with a more competitive league, with players that are based, in their own country, some people believe that they're less spoiled. They're bound to work harder. They don't have as much of an ego, right? Ghana, remember that they've been scarred by that image in 2014 of the FIFA World Cup, where players demanded that their bonuses be paid upfront, and there was, luggages of cash flown into Brazil, and you had players like John Boy, I think the defender at the time, walking around with stacks of cash, and that kind of image that showed the Ghanaian public that these players only care about money, So when you have players coming in, like, it's unfair to talk about Kudus like this because he's really applied himself and given 100%. But when you have a player like Kudus who's worth 100 and 150 million, sometimes, like, you can, if you're a little cynical, you could say, look, does this guy really care about playing for Ghana? Because look, he's going to start playing in the Champions League soon, or he plays in the Premier League against the best clubs and the best players in the world. He's making 200K a month, that kind of thinking, that's a narrative that exists. I don't know. I'm not saying it's true or it's untrue, but that narrative does exist.
Do you think when it's all said and done that Ghana will qualify for the 2026 World Cup?
It all depends on what happens in the next 2-3 months, because we have the next international window in November. November. Are they going to stick with Otto Addo? Are they going to make a coaching change? Who is the coaching change? I was thinking, for example, Hervé Renard, but he just went back to Saudi Arabia on big bucks. But maybe Aliou Cisse, maybe, I don't know. Do they make a coaching change or do they stick with Otto Addo? If it's Otto Addo, does he make drastic changes, either in the personnel that he's picking or in the tactics that he's employing? All of these things, I think, are going to give me my answer. But what I could say is if things remain the way they are, I think they're in real danger of missing out for the 2026 FIFA World Cup.